In March 2008, out trotted this weird little game called Sega Superstars Tennis. Did you play it? It was this really weird and frankly eccentric game that felt like it'd been plucked out of a random idea generator. Yet, it was one that I personally found to be wildly amusing, because Sega really thought they had superstars. I mean, who could forget such industry icons as Gilius and Gum? It occurred to me just how far Sega had fallen since the 90s. Surely, I thought to myself, they had to have better than this. And, as a matter of fact, as of 2005, just a couple years prior, they did have better than this. They did, in fact, have a character on their hands who would prove to be more beloved and recognisable than pudding. But none of us could have known it back then. Fast forward to 2016. I'm a sad and lonely little man studying writing at a London university. Not yet to become the YouTube icon and frequent intercourse haver I am today. I'm listening to game journalist Tamoor Hussain on one of my favourite podcasts talk about this game called Yakuza 0. He's venerating it. He gets frequently mugged by a man twice his size, and he's loving it. I decide to get in on the hype and try it myself. I bounce off like a thing that bounces off things that things bounce on. There's a lot I can respect and appreciate about it. I love the tone, I love the setting, I think the combat seems neat, but I have problems that no one I can find seems to share. 6 years pass. I am now the YouTube icon I mentioned eventually becoming earlier on, the one who has lots of sex. With an Xbox Series X and a subscription of Game Pass acquired, I wonder if I wasn't in the right headspace back then. There was so much I liked about Yakuza, maybe I should give it another try now that I'm older, wiser, and know what a Cleveland steamer is. I don't want to trudge back through the same hours of Yakuza 0 I'd already played, so I start in what I think is the most logical place, the remake of 2005's original Yakuza game, 2016's Yakuza Kiwami, and in it, I find something. I find the hard drive review of Yakuza Kiwami. In a proverbial sense, of course, because I find lots of things to say about it. Keep up, I like to go fast. Wherein good and bad are useless concepts, and the nuances of our own morality are the only thing worth truly analysing. Well, that and that crazy ass bug girl me again. We'll talk about it. I am First Lieutenant of the Goofy Guys clan, Fudge, and I implore you to join me on my journey of discovering the appeal of Sega's supposed modern golden boy. Interesting start. The original Yakuza introduces us to Kiryu Kazama, who takes the fall for his best friend shooting a nonce by going to prison for 10 years. When he gets out, the world has changed. The woman he loves has gone missing. His and many other crime families are fighting over 10 billion yen, and that best friend he did time for has become the Yakuza equivalent of Sasuke from Naruto. Yakuza boldly asks the question no other media has or will ever have the creativity to ask again. What if crime was anime? Dudes rip their suits off to reveal sick tattoos before climactic fistfights on rooftops. Everyone can sponge 3 bullets like they're made out of titanium, and plot armor power-ups are frequent. Nowhere is this better exemplified than by the character of Goro Majima. Confession time. I did not care for Goro Majima.
What?
Did not care for Goro Majima.
How can you even say that?
Explain yourself. What didn't you like about it?
He insists upon himself.
What?
Majima, who constantly pushes Kiryu to remember the fighting skills he had before he went to prison so he can have a stronger opponent because he likes fighting, because he likes pain and he's crazy, is the embodiment of Yakuza's campy anime storytelling sensibilities. Sensibilities that I generally have little patience for. Yet, over time, as I suspect he did on many people, Majima grew on me. I started off rolling my eyes at his whole anime rival anti-hero, I want to fight you at your strongest shtick, but then the sheer wily coyote-ish lengths he went to fight Kiryu and test his strength became so increasingly ridiculous and insane that I couldn't help but find myself wildly entertained. This dude popped out of the trunk of a car to fight me. He attacked me in a burger place. He hid under a giant traffic cone to ambush me. He invited me to a strip club that was empty and started pole dancing in front of me, and then he attacked me there as well. Majima eventually wound up being my favourite part of the whole game, and he makes for a hell of a personification of this game and this series' appeal as a whole. The polarity of the Yakuza games, the way it balances 2 distinct tones, is so daring, and it shouldn't work, but it does, because the Yakuza devs understand that if you're doing a bit, you commit to the fucking bit. Yes, there are fights on rooftops and characters powering up through flashbacks of people who mean things to them, but as soon as you're done with this, you can run 5 blocks down the street and battle literal children in a card game where you fight with sexy ladies dressed up as giant bugs. You can bump into a woman who gives you a personality quiz through which you compete with 2 other side characters to see who most qualifies for being the kind of brooding middle-aged man she refers to as a badass dad. You can run all around town taking complimentary pocket tissues from vendors on the street to save a man from explosive diarrhea on a public toilet, whose diarrhea becomes so bad that it gives him a nosebleed and he has to beg you to get him more tissues whilst horror music plays. Obsession time. Knowing that the sub-stories are generally people's favourite part of the Yakuza games, I sought them out in Yakuza Kiwami quite ferociously. Having played nearly all of them, my conclusion? They're less funny and varied than Yakuza 0. Though it makes sense that they'd feel relatively safe compared to 0, being that this is the remake of the first game in the series, one that was likely still setting the tone and trying to find its feet in terms of how ridiculous it was willing to get. Even feeling that these were a noticeable step down from Yakuza 0 in terms of sheer entertainment factor, I still felt compelled enough to seek out a hefty majority of them. I think that bodes well. The thing about these sub-stories is that they aren't just wacky side adventures where you meet funny one-off characters and get into a whole bunch of wild situations. They also serve to flesh out Kiryu's character beyond the main plot. Now, I'm not going to tell you everything that happens in the main plot because I think there's a lot of supposed retrospectives and video essays out there recently that literally just spend 2 hours recapping what happens in a movie or a game, and I think that's kind of lame. But I will say that Kiryu spends 90% of the plot in Yakuza Kiwami being deathly serious or sad. Recession time. Yakuza 0 was set in the 80s, Japan's glittering boom period. By the time the 90s roll around in Kiwami, Japan is in deep recession. And then he goes to prison for 10 years, and he comes out in the early 2000s and it's still not exactly over. Not to mention that, spoiler alert for a 20-year-old game, almost every main character that isn't Kiryu in this game ends up dead. That's not very fun. Kiryu Kazama has never seen a pair of double doors he doesn't want to kick a guy through. He fends off so many weird guys in cheap suits you'd think he had one of the world's most profitable OnlyFans accounts. It's mostly through Yakuza's sub-stories that you get to see the other side of Kiryu. The side who's down to clown. The one who will Shinan again. It's not so much the sub-stories that is the appeal of Yakuza as it is Kiryu, in my estimation, as it is Majima, as it is this juggling act of 2 completely disparate tones that come together and harmonise. Kiryu can go off and do the dumbest stuff in these games, and then you go back to the main story, find yourself surrounded by 20 guys with knives and guns, and remind them all, single-handedly, that when they sleeping on you, tuck them in. There's this thing you might have heard of before in games, this kind of abstract concept that's used to explain a disconnect between a game's story and the actions the player can take in a game. It's called ludonarrative dissonance. One plaudit I hear frequently lavished upon the Yakuza games is that it is absent of ludonarrative dissonance, where so many of its contemporaries are riddled with it. In the Grand Theft Auto games, for example, games in which you similarly typically play as a criminal who is one of the good ones, away from the main story in which you're typically fighting to set things right or at least metaphorically stick it to a greater evil, you can just go on a mega murder killing rampage at any point, hit people with your car, shoot cops, blow stuff up, and none of those actions there will ever be addressed in the fiction. Kiryu is written as an honourable man, and so when controlling him, the player can't just attack or steal from random civilians, and they only fight when provoked or when necessary. Does this mean that Yakuza is the first and only game series ever to not have ludonarrative dissonance? No. In Chapter 4, a very small and important child asked me to help them save this puppy from starvation. I accepted, then walked approximately 10 meters down the street to the nearest restaurant and ate an entire extra-large beef bowl by myself. Sorry, Yakuza fans, Yakuza is not free of ludonarrative dissonance. Just ask the elderly lady I recklessly shoved out of the way in search of the nearest sex club. The laws of game design can never truly dictate the consistency between story and character, because ultimately I, the player, am in charge. In my world, Kiryu would rather play darts than help people. In my world, Kiryu is kind of a dick. In my world, I am God. Don't believe me? Watch. I'm going to put an ad right here. So does this mean that Yakuza's commitment to its main character is fruitless then? No. not at all. It's the main reason I'd say the character persists in so many people's minds, and yes, I'm gonna say it, would retroactively belong in Sega Superstars Tennis. The creators of Yakuza clearly love Kiryu Kazama to an almost fanatical extent. One of the series directors literally came out and said that Kiryu is stronger than John Wick. I love this. It's so petty. If I ever have an intellectual property of my own, this is what I will do. One day I will make it a canonical fact that my character is better at sex than Master Chief with no input from Microsoft whatsoever. It's because of this love of the character that the player can't just attack innocence. It's also likely the reason that the character continues to cameo in other games or spin-offs in the same series, and in other series. And it's also specifically because of this love of the character that Kiryu hasn't popped up as a guest character in any of the many fighting games people keep pushing for him to appear in. Because Yakuza's creator has been very committed to the idea that Kiryu doesn't hit women. And so yes, I was drawn back to the series over time, I think largely because of the way that the character persists, because the creators lionising their protagonist in such a way, intentionally choosing not to market the character by foregoing crossover appearances that would compromise his fictional morals, is cool. I really respect that kind of artistic integrity in an increasingly commercialised industry. My point remains that no matter how hard you try, whether facilitated by the player goofing off or an out-of-the-box writing choice, the character the player is controlling will always seem at least somewhat at odds with the character in the story, but this commitment is the kind of thing I love, and it makes it easier for you to just look the other way whenever an out of character moment, however small, whether in the writing or the gameplay, kind of pops up out of nowhere and slaps you in the face. So, the burning question then. What was my beef with Yakuza 0, and did Yakuza Kiwami fix any of that? My beef with Yakuza 0 was the random enemy encounters. Between the random enemy encounters and the sub-stories, it feels like you're stopped by like 6 things every single time you're trying to get from point A to point B, and I felt this massively hurt the pacing. This was true for Yakuza Kiwami also. In both games, I wanted to do a lot of the sub-stories because of how lauded they are, but I also never felt truly comfortable taking time off the main story to knock them out because there was often a sense of urgency pushing me along. This, as far as I can see, is true for all Yakuza games, and it's had the ones I've played feel very stop-start. More criminally, this constant bombardment of freaks and geeks stops you from ever truly being able to take in the sights of Kamurocho, which has to be one of my favourite settings in any game ever. I love neon. Capitalism may have turned my generation's attention span and media literacy into mush by inundating us with short-form content that's interested solely in the facts and hasn't a care in the world for nuance, creativity or artistic vision, but it sure does know how to light up a street. At the risk of being a guy who compares his real life to a video game he's playing, the town of Reading, England, in which I currently reside, reminds me a lot of Kamurocho at night especially. It has all the neon and billboards and tight streets and alleyways. I'd walk around more at night. Alas, I am not stronger than John Wick. I make YouTube videos. I have to question why these enemy encounters impede you so when such a huge majority of the sub-stories end with and feature multiple combat encounters, and when only a short way into the game you unlock an optional arena. When you're trying to simply get from one place to another so often in these games, and you're so frequently forced to run away and take a different route to avoid dealing with another routine and ultimately inconsequential combat encounter, the simple act of traversal feels like a big chore. And if Yakuza Kiwami was much longer, certainly if it was as long as most of the other Yakuza games apparently are, I wonder if I'd have finished it after all. This has been the hard drive review of Yakuza Kiwami. I did finish it, and I have this to say. I liked Yakuza Kiwami. It is almost definitely slightly inferior to Yakuza 0, and I finished it simply because I am a different man now. Also, I will probably not play another one, maybe Kiwami 2. Instead, I will elect to like Yakuza from afar. I think it's cool to be happy for fans of other things and let them enjoy themselves. So I hope you like your samurai spin-offs and your JRPGs and the inevitable Fortnite crossover. I will simply watch from the sidelines with an unshakable smile on my face. Yep, hold on to your hats, it's that time of the video again. Yet another edition of Fudge's post-video poetry. Here's a piece I believe is particularly fitting for the subject of this video. It's called The funny sad boy agenda. The funny sad boy agenda is real and you should be afraid. There may be no document listing the rules that we've made, but we're organised, handsome, funny and sad. We all have a way with words and are mad at our dad. We meet in an underground bunker once every week. We follow a code to ensure that none of our funny sad secrets leak. We listen to pop punk, drink milkshakes and share funny sad boy tips. But when we're less funny and more sad, we fix it with a kiss on the lips. That's right, ladies. Be jealous. You wish you were in on this. No need to tell us. There's a no girls allowed policy, and of that we're glad. Because if you were allowed down here, we'd no longer be sad. See you next time. Harddrive.net, baby.